Hey guys, tonight we journey to the misty plateaus of Ethiopia, tracing the origins of a ritual you probably won't survive without medieval Ethiopian coffee ceremonies at dawn. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what local time it is right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through damp grass as the first, pale light threads across the highland peaks. The air tastes of cool earth and wet moss, like the world has just exhaled after a deep sleep. You probably won't survive this without at least one more yawn. But the ritual you're about to witness is worth staying awake for. As you brush away tendrils of mist clinging to your cloak, you hear the distant call of a bird. Some say the honey guide, others insist it's a hornbill. Yet historians still argue whether it's even the right species to herald coffee time. Mainstream fact: coffee cultivation in Ethiopia dates back to at least the 9th century, long before it became a global sensation. Quirky tidbit: local lore credits a goat herder named Kaldi for discovering coffee when his jittery goats, after eating red berries, kept dancing all night, though modern scholars still debate whether goats dance or just twitch erratically from caffeine overload. You chuckle at the mental image of caprine jitterbugs under a moonlit sky. The trail opens onto terraced fields, each row of bushes like soldiers, standing to attention in neat formation. You inhale deeply, there's the faint tang of green leaves, the rich promise of roasted beans yet to come. That aroma is almost like perfume to the local farmers. Some say it wards off evil spirits at dawn. However, nobody agrees on which spirits, and historians still argue whether this was ever more than a cheeky marketing rumor. Even here, smack in the birthplace of a coffee people love a good origin story. Your guide, Mariam, a farmer whose family tends these slopes, presses a weathered hand to her chest when she speaks of the beans. At sunrise, she murmurs, "We gather in small circles, brewing in jabanas passed down through generations." You peer at the clay pot, she gestures toward its bulbous base and slender neck, stained by centuries of coffee oils. That pot, called a jabana, is the beating heart of the ceremony. Mainstream fact: the word jabina comes from the Oromo language, reflecting Ethiopia's diverse linguistic tapestry. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believe that if you whistle at your yabina while it boils, your coffee will taste extra bitter, though nobody seems eager to test the theory. And historians still argue whether it was a playful superstition or an early quality control hack. As the sun peaks above the ridge, you settle onto a woven reed mat where elders have arranged 3 small cup-like bowls called Sinai. The soft scratch of reeds under you feels oddly luxurious in this simple gathering. A slender stream of smoke curls from the coals beneath the jabina, heralding the moment when raw beans will metamorphose into liquid warmth. Modern aside, if this were Starbucks, they'd call it the Highland Reserve Sunrise Blend marketing team optional. You try to suppress another yawn, but the sight of tiny plumes of steam rising from a freshly poured sinus makes your eyes flutter open. The scent is heady, almost floral, like nectar you imagine bees would fight over if they had opposable thumbs. Yet scholars still debate whether ancient Ethiopians perceived coffee as a medicinal tonic or simply an enchanting beverage. Either way, here you're on the brink of tasting history. Mariam ladles a thin trickle of coffee from the jabana into each Sinai. The liquid lands with a soft hiss, and you lean in so close, you feel the heat kiss your eyelashes. You lift the bowl, cradling it in both hands. Warmth seeps into your fingers, spreading like a secret you're sworn to keep. With the first sip, a rush of bittersweet notes wakes your palate. Dark chocolate, a hint of wildflowers, and an earthy depth that seems to anchor you to this ancient land. You sip again, slower this time, letting the flavors roll over your tongue. A gentle sarcasm slips in. Wow, no Starbucks pumpkin spice latte could ever touch this. You think, though, coconut milk aficionados might riot on YouTube for that claim. Yet historians still argue whether early coffee houses in the region were more like communal living rooms or spiritual retreats. In either case, you feel something sacred in this simple exchange of bean to bowl. As the group murmurs, you glance at the horizon where dawn's glow bleeds into rose and gold. Here, coffee isn't just a drink, it's an invocation of community, a bridge between earth and sky. And you, bleary-eyed traveler, are privileged to witness the ceremony as it's been practiced for centuries. You stumble along a narrow goat track, the earth beneath your boots soft with dew, as Mariam leads you toward the grazing herd. The goats bleat softly, their breath puffing little clouds in the cool morning air. Remember their jittery dance from last night's tale. You probably haven't forgotten Chaldee's dancing goats by now, especially after that goat's virus burpees mental image you conjured. Yet historians still argue whether goats truly went into a caffeinated frenzy, or whether Chalde simply witnessed an unusually energetic herd and spun a yarn that stuck. Mainstream fact: the legend of Chalde, a 9th century Ethiopian goat herder who noticed his goats frolicking after eating red coffee cherries, first appears in a 17th century Sufi text, centuries after the supposed event. Quirky tidbit: some Ethiopian villagers claim that goat droppings once dried and burned as incense were used to clear evil spirits from brewing huts, though nobody's dared to light a pyre of dung recently, and historians still argue whether that practice ever existed outside tall tales. You crouch to inspect a cluster of bright red berries dangling from a low branch. They gleam like polished beads in the dawn light. You break one between your teeth, curious despite yourself, and a sharp tang pops on your tongue, earthy, a little sour like biting into a supercharged cranberry. A warning bell rings in your head. Don't go chasing wild caffeine. But the shepherd's nomadic curiosity is infectious. You pocket a few cherries for later imagining yourself as Chalde, except with better dental hygiene. The herd chifs as if sensing your presence, and one goat lifts its head, chewing thoughtfully. You wonder if it's judging you. After all, it's the OG bean connoisseur. Or so the legend suggests. Modern aside, if goat influencers existed on Instagram, this one would have 1 million followers by now. Yet even your imagination can't confirm whether Chaldee's goats were early social media stars or just regular bleeders. Mariam beckons you onward and you follow the goats down a gentle slope into a thicket of acacia trees. Light filters through thorns and leaves, painting dancing patches on the forest floor. Here, Sufi dervishes once roamed, seeking divine insight. Some scholars argue that they refined the beans into a focused meditation aid, while others insist early Christian monks in Yemeni monasteries stole the recipe first. Historians still argue whether coffee's journey from Ethiopia to Arabia was a peaceful gift exchange or a series of thefts in monastery cloakrooms. You crouch beside a shallow stream where goats pause to drink. Their hoofprints mar the water's surface, and you dip your fingers in feeling icy freshness that contrasts with the warming promise of caffeine. A light breeze carries the scent of wild mint. Locals sometimes slip a sprig into their brew to soothe indigestion, though no one's entirely sure if the mint infusion is a centuries-old custom. or a modern health hack. You tuck a leaf behind your ear, half expecting goats to join you in mintly fashion. In the underbrush, you spot a weathered pot, half buried under leaves. Its rim is chipped, but you trace swirling patterns etched into the clay, a possible relic of early roasting experiments, or merely a broken cooking vessel. You brush it off, imagining novice coffee experimenters testing tiny batches, convinced they'd struck bean gold while everyone else drank plain water. Quirky tidbit: some Kemant tribespeople believe that invoking the name of Koldi 3 times over a pot of beans ensures a smooth roast, though nobody records if it works, and historians still argue whether this chant was ever part of genuine brewing lore. Up ahead, the path opens onto a rocky clearing, scattered with smooth stones worn by centuries of pilgrim footsteps. Here, you settle on a flat boulder, letting your gaze travel over the misty hills. Mariam produces a small bowl of dried berries, coffee cherries laid out to dry, like scarlet petals on a parchment. You lean in, breathing in their subtle, fruity aroma. The sun's rays begin to warm the air and the haze lifts, revealing the terraced fields you glimpsed in the last section. You're reminded of that smoke-kissed Jabina ritual. This goat-led pilgrimage feels like a prelude. As you pop a dried berry into your mouth, your teeth crack its skin and release a concentrated burst of sweetness, balanced by bitterness, like nature's own candy bar. You chew thoughtfully, recalling the legend's moral: even the lowest goat can uncover wonders. You let out a soft laugh, picturing a goat strutting like a caffeine-fueled peacock. Modern aside, goat yoga trends would have nothing on caffeine-charged caprine cardio. Mariam settles beside you and traces a finger in the dirt, sketching rough goat shapes and swirling steam lines. They believed, she says, that the dancing goats guided the way to divine insight. You tilt your head, half expecting goat-shaped spirits to materialize in the morning haze. Mainstream fact coffee spread from Ethiopian highlands to the Arabian Peninsula by the 15th century, cementing its role in Sufi rituals to sustain nocturnal prayers. Yet, even that passage carries mysteries: no traveler logs, no ship manifests, just orphan stories whispered in desert winds. You sit in companionable silence, the goats browsing around you. Their gentle chewing and the soft rustle of leaves form a quiet ASMR chorus. You almost drift off into a goat-induced reverie again. You probably won't survive a nap here if you want to finish this tour, but the thought of missing the next step jolts you awake. Historians still argue whether coffee's mythic origins began with dance or devotion, beans or beliefs. But here in the clearing, legend and landscape merge into a single timeless moment. The goats slowly wander back up the slope, as if convinced they've delivered their secret and now politely excuse themselves. You rise, brushing loose soil from your trousers, and follow Mariam toward a smoke-streaked ridge where the next ceremony awaits. The echo of bleats fades behind you, replaced by the distant hum of anticipation, your senses primed for roasting, grinding, and sipping. And you, intrepid traveler, carry with you a taste of legend, a story of humble goats that set the world dancing one bean at a time. You step into a low, stone-walled chamber, where dawn's glow filters through narrow slits, casting patterns on the cool flagstones. The air smells faintly of incense, and damp earth mingled with a whisper of that familiar coffee aroma, as if the beans themselves have followed you here. You probably won't survive this narrative without imagining yourself draped in a loose wool cloak. But here, in this Sufi zawiya, the real show is the gentle clink of prayer beads and the murmured debates that accompany the first cups of brew. Mainstream fact: by the 15th century, Sufi mystics in what is now Yemen were widely drinking coffee to sustain nighttime devotions, transforming sleepy gatherings into focused circles of remembrance. Quirky tidbit. Some ascetic dervishes allegedly tied small pouches of roasted beans to their belts like talismans, convinced they held protective charms, though nobody is quite sure if they kept the beans for brewing or just as caffeine-powered jewelry. Historians still argue whether those pouches were more for show or treasured brew bags. You slide onto a woven mat beside a low lacquered table where three elderly sheiks lean forward, sipping from delicate cups that look too fine to touch the rough stone floor. A slender stream of steam curls upward, and you can almost taste the earthy sweetness before the liquid even touches your lips. A soft chuckle escapes you. These cups are so fancy, I half expect a Starbucks logo. Etched in arabesque, you muse. Though corporate branding would certainly clash with the spiritual vibe here. One shake his beard like. Spun silver raises a cup in his calloused hand. Brothers, he intones. Does this warmth open the heart to the divine or merely distract the mind with carnal pleasure? The others nod, stroking their beards as though pondering the price of coffee on distant caravan routes. You lean in ears, straining to catch every nuance, because this is where myth meets theology, and your sleepy ASMR voice can't help but savor the texture of their words. You lift your own cup warmth, radiating through your palms, and take a careful sip. The taste is smoother than you expected, honeyed undertones, a whisper of smoke and a lingering hint of wildflower nectar. It feels like a hug in liquid form, coaxing eyelids to flutter open. Yet, scholars still argue whether early drinkers saw coffee as a sacrament or simply a clever way to avoid nodding off during pre-dawn prayers. The second sheikh strokes his mustache thoughtfully. If the bean grants clarity, it is a divine gift, he says. But if we crave its matrix of bitterness for mere alertness, have we not betrayed our vows? You almost snort at the dramatic phrasing, picturing a medieval coffee reviewer writing 5 stars, just enough bitterness to liven my dicker, but not so much I forget my name. Modern aside, imagine a medieval Yelp review. The ambience is nice, but too many thoughts about God. 3-5 would caffeinate again. The third sheikh chuckles softly, the sound like distant bells. Have we not seen, he counters, that the bean's fire ignites the tongue in praise? Is this not akin to kindling the lamp of the soul? You nod along, appreciating the metaphor, though inwardly you wonder whether these debates ever got as spicy as your village's cardamom infusion recipe. Especially since some villagers claim a dash of chili makes devotion burn brighter. Still, nobody quite agrees on the theological implications. A scholar in the corner gently taps a parchment scroll, its edges frayed from use. Historians still argue whether coffee's spread was driven by spiritual necessity or mercantile ambition. He murmurs, eyes gleaming beneath bushy brows. You lean forward, drawn in by the cadence. Merchant caravans surely saw profit in these dark berries. Meanwhile, devout scholars found in each cup the promise of extended vigil. You imagine a caffeine-fueled debate so intense that even the goats of Kaldi would have paused to listen. You sip again, savoring the warmth that chases away lingering fatigue. It's as if each swallow carries a note of the chamber's hushed reverence. A quirk tickles your mind. Rumor has it some Sufis once dipped their prayer beads in leftover coffee grounds to darken them, a symbolic union of devotion and being, though nobody's preserved a single dyed tasbih for modern analysis. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine ritual or simply a clever way to repurpose the dregs. You glance at the scuffed wooden door, wondering how many travelers like yourself have bowed their heads here, seeking both spiritual clarity and a morning jolt. The soft patter of rain begins on the roof tiles, adding a gentle percussion to the low chanting. You lean back, cradling the cup like a fragile artifact, and let the scene wash over you, the murmured prayers, the curling steam, the feeling of belonging to a lineage of seekers from centuries past. And you, drowsy wanderer, are part of that tradition now, even if only in imagination. With each sip, you join a circle that still debates the bean's true purpose, divine illumination or earthly stimulation. Either way, your heart feels a little lighter, your eyelids a touch less heavy, and your spirit more curious about what lies beyond this chamber's misty veil. You follow Miriam up a winding path as the dawn light strengthens, revealing a patchwork of terrace slopes carved into the mountainside. The terraces rise and fall like gentle waves, frozen in time, each one brimming with coffee bushes, heavy with deep green leaves, and clusters of bright cherries. You probably won't survive this steep climb without pausing for breath and maybe a quick side hug of a sturdy bush, but the panorama is worth every panting step. Mainstream fact: Ethiopia is the birthplace of the Arabica coffee species, which today accounts for about 60% of global coffee production. Quirky tidbit: some local farmers swear that talking politely to their coffee plants, "Hello, my fine bean friends," helps them yield richer cherries. Though nobody's conducted a controlled study and historians still argue whether this practice originated as genuine horticultural wisdom or an amusing way to pass the time during long harvests. You crouch beside a low-hanging branch, fingertips brushing the glossy cherries that glow like rubies in the morning sun. Their fragrance is subtle but unmistakable, a green, earthy sweetness that hints at the deeper roasted flavors you've already tasted. You pinch a single cherry off the bush and roll it gently between your fingers, feeling the slight give before you pop it into your mouth. The flesh is crisp and tart, leaving a sticky sweetness on your lips that contrasts with the woody aroma of the surrounding forest. Modern aside, if this were a wine tasting, sommeliers would argue over terroir notes like volcanic soil and highland minerality, though most coffee shops simply list notes of berry. Mariam squats beside you and gestures to the neat rows. "We plant these bushes on slopes between 1,500 and 2,200 meters," she explains. "The altitude gives the cherries a slow-growing season, making the flavors more complex." You trace her gaze across the hillsides, imagining the patient labor it takes to tend such fields without the aid of tractors. Mainstream fact: Arabica coffee thrives in cooler high-altitude regions because slower bean development intensifies flavor compounds. Quirky tidbit: some farmers play low-volume music, traditional Ethiopian tunes, or the occasional modern ballad to serenade their plants, claiming the vibrations improve growth, though botanists still debate whether plants respond to sound or simply to the added care and attention. You stand and stretch, feeling the morning chill lift as the sun climbs higher. Farmers in wide-brimmed straw hats move through the rows, their baskets slung over their shoulders, hands swift and sure as they strip only the ripest cherries. You watch a woman named Desta deftly pinch clusters of 2 or 3 cherries at a time, her movements so practiced it looks like a dance. You join her, learning to read the subtle color gradient from light crimson to deep garnet that marks perfect ripeness. You marvel at how such small variations can signal huge differences in sweetness and acidity. Historians still argue whether ancient harvesters used similar visual cues or relied more on taste tests. There are no surviving harvest manuals from the 12th century, only fragments of oral traditions. As you work, the valley below fills with the sound of distant drumming from a nearby hamlet, perhaps a wedding celebration or a seasonal festival. The rhythm pulses through the air, weaving with birdsong, and the rustle of coffee leaves creating an impromptu symphony. You wipe sweat from your brow and realize that even in this world, centuries removed, the bond between ceremony and community remains unchanged. The coffee you help pluck will eventually be roasted, ground, and served in a ritual, not unlike the one you witnessed at dawn. Modern aside, today, baristas call this farm-to-cup storytelling though. For Ethiopian farmers, it's simply the way life has always been. After an hour, you stand back surveying the baskets at your feet, brimming with cherries. You catch your breath and let your gaze travel toward a distant ridge where jagged peaks crown the horizon. The highland air tastes fresher here, charged with the promise of adventure and caffeination. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, farmers hang tiny bells on the coffee bushes, believing that the gentle jingling deters birds and monkeys from snatching the cherries, though savvy wildlife seem to learn to ignore the noise. And historians still argue whether this bell tactic ever truly protected crops or just amused farmers. Mariam leads you to a small stone hut at the edge of the field. The hut's walls are built from volcanic rock, and its doorway frames a simple drying tray, where cherries spread thinly to wither under the sun. You kneel to examine the rows. Each cherry glistens with morning dew, their skins taut and brilliant. We dry these for about 2 weeks, Mariam explains, turning them regularly to prevent mold. You lean in, inhaling the fragrant mix of fruit and earth. Drying concentrates sugars and deepens complexity, an ancient technique that survived countless centuries. Mainstream fact: traditional sun-drying of coffee cherries is one of the oldest post-harvest methods still used in many Ethiopian regions today. Historians still argue whether early processors fermented the cherries intentionally or if fermentation was simply a byproduct of inconsistent drying conditions. You stand brushing bits of dried husk from your hands and look out over the terraces one last time before descending. Each step carries the weight of centuries of cultivation, farmers who coaxed life from harsh slopes, adapting their methods to shifting climates and markets. You marvel at the endurance of tradition and the way a simple bean can anchor an entire culture in place. As you step onto the path leading back down toward the village, you feel both grounded and uplifted, your senses sharpened by the tactile memory of each glossy cherry. Ahead, the smoke from roasting fires drifts lazily into the sky, whispering promises of the next stage in this journey. You tighten your cloak against a cooler breeze, your heart quickening with anticipation. The highland beans you help tend will soon crackle in embers, filling the air with that irresistible aroma you know so well. And you, weary but exhilarated traveler, are part of this ancient cycle of care. From seed to cup, from earth to awakening. You trudge back into the village square, where tendrils of smoke drift skyward from low stone hearths and flickering coals. The scent of burning wood mingles with the sharp, sweet promise of roasting beans, and you probably won't survive this olfactory onslaught without inhaling deeply, so go ahead and fill your lungs. Here, the ritual of open fire roasting is as essential as the beans themselves, a smoky ceremony that coaxes raw cherries toward their destiny as liquid gold. Mainstream fact: traditional Ethiopian coffee roasting uses wood or charcoal fires, often fueled by local species like juniper or acacia, which impart subtle flavor notes to the beans. Quirky tidbit: some villagers claim that singing a high-pitched tune over the roasting pan helps the beans roast more evenly, though nobody's measured the effect, and historians still argue whether coffee songcraft was ever widespread or simply a charming improvisation by early roasters. You approach a squat iron pan called a mitad set, directly atop glowing coals. Its shallow curve holds a handful of pale green beans that sizzle as they meet the heat. A stout wooden paddle rests nearby, your only tool to stir the beans and prevent scorching. Mariam hands it to you, her eyes dancing with encouragement. "It's like stirring a wake-up potion," she says, smiling. You grip the paddle and brace for the first crackle. As you push the beans in slow circular motions, a light hiss turns to a steady pop like distant rain tapping on the roof. You pause, struck by the sound, a symphony of transformation. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, roasters believe that each pop is a spirit, speaking to you, sharing ancient wisdom, though nobody's translated what the beans actually say, and historians still argue whether these popping spirits were ever taken seriously or just part of the coffee theater. The beans darken from green to pale yellow, then shift through tawny browns to deep chestnut. You lean in, fascinated by the color dance and the rising heat warming your face. A bead of sweat trickles down your temple part. Excitement part, the potent warmth radiating from the metat. Modern aside, if you were roasting at home, a digital thermometer would beep at exactly 200 degrees, but here you trust your eyes, ears, and the feel of the paddle in your hand. You adjust the beans to the edge of the pan where the heat is gentler, then swirl them back toward the center. The first crack, a sharp snap, echoes like a whip. You jump, half expecting spark showers before laughing at yourself. Pop one, you joke to Mariam, "I thought the mythical goat spirits had returned." Historians still argue whether early roasters marked that first crack as the perfect roast point or roasted darker for bolder flavors. There are no medieval roasting logs, only oral traditions passed across generations. The aroma intensifies a roasting scent that teases dark chocolate, toasted nuts, and a warm bread crust. You inhale it as though it were fresh air, eyes closed against the sun's rising glare. It's a smell that lodges in memory, capable of waking sleepers from the deepest slumber. You remember that yawn you try to suppress, now impossible to resist. Yet, somehow, the roasting fire keeps you alert. As the color deepens, you see wisps of oil begin to glisten on the bean surfaces, a sign of a darker roast. Mariam nods at you, her gaze approving. Stop when the beans are a uniform deep brown, she instructs in a quiet voice that still carries over the crackling fire. You give the paddle one final swirl, then tip the beans into a wide woven basket to cool. They steam lightly, filling the air around you with a soothing cloud of aroma. Mainstream fact: cooling roasted beans quickly prevents over-roasting, preserving desired flavor profiles. A practice recognized by modern roasters and traditionalists alike. Quirky tidbit: some artisans toss a handful of fresh rosemary leaves into the cooling basket, believing the herb's resinous scent infuses the beans with floral undertones, though no flavor chemist has confirmed this effect. And historians still argue whether herb-infused cooling was ever a genuine tradition or a recent culinary experiment. You lean over the basket, cupping your hands to catch the warmth and fragrance, and can't help but smile. The beans now gleam with an oily sheen, each one a miniature world of roasted possibility. A playful thought crosses your mind: if coffee beans had a Tinder profile, they'd brag about their smoky side and exotic origins. You chuckle, realizing you've drifted into modern humor while surrounded by ancient practices. As the last wisps of steam curl upward, villagers begin gathering around, weaving together stories and jokes. A young boy snatches a bean and tosses it in his mouth, only to wince at the intense bitterness before keying in on the hidden sweetness. Laughter ripples through the group, blending seamlessly with the crackling coals. It's a communal roast, a shared achievement, each person invested in coaxing the bean from raw obscurity to aromatic potential. You scoop a few beans into a small cloth pouch and tie it around your neck, an impromptu talisman from the roasting fire. Keep the aroma close. Mariam teases and you'll never lose your way. Historians still argue whether early pilgrims carried roasted beans as protective charms on journeys. Some say they did, others insist it's just a story to keep travelers full of bean-scented bravado. With the roasting complete and your pouch in place, you breathe in one last deep, smoky lace inhale. The sun, now fully risen, paints the village in warm gold, and the air vibrates with the promise of freshly ground and brewed elixir. Ahead lies the grinding stones, the Jabina, and another chapter in this aromatic odyssey. You wipe your hands on your cloak, savoring the lingering heat, and follow Mariam toward a simple hut where heavy grindstones await. You step into a low-roofed hut whose walls are darkened by smoke rings and centuries of ceremony, the air thick with the faint residue of countless past brews. In the center sits a squat earthenware vessel, the Jabina, its bulbous base and slender neck blackened by soot. You probably won't survive this moment without feeling its quiet gravity, as though the pot itself holds whispered secrets from every soul who ever drank from it. Historians still argue whether the Jabina's distinctive shape evolved purely for function or carried symbolic meaning tied to the earth and sky. Mainstream fact: the Jabina is traditionally made from clay, sourced near coffee-growing regions, fired to withstand direct flame and retain heat for slow, even brewing. Quirky tidbit: some artisans carve tiny decorative bridges on the Jabina's spout, claiming they guide the coffee flow into cups more elegantly, though nobody's measured if these ridges actually affect pour speed, and historians still argue whether ornamentation began as functional design or mere flair. You crouch before the Jabina, tracing a finger over its rounded belly, feeling the cool imprint of ancient craftsmanship. It's weighted like a globe in your hands, promising transformation, raw grounds into liquid warmth. A narrow clay lid rests on top, and you lift it gently, peering into the dark interior, where yesterday's grounds likely linger in faded memory. Your fingertips brush a raised seam, circling the pot, perhaps a maker's signature, or the remnant of a humble workshop firing. Modern aside, in specialty cafes, baristas might debate the merits of Chemex versus AeroPress, but here there's only the enduring simplicity of the Jabina. Mariam brings forward a small pile of coarsely ground beans, smoky shards of coffee that catch the light like dusky gemstones. We grind by hand, she says, her voice hushed as if carrying reverence. To honor each step, you scoop a handful and inhale. The scent is deeper now, wood smoke mingling with earth and ember. As you pour the grounds into the Jabina's base, you feel the grains slip like fine sand, each one a promise of flavor. Quirky tidbit: some families add a single clove or cardamom pod directly into the Jabina, believing it infuses the brew with protective properties, though nobody's isolated compounds to prove this. And historians still argue whether spice additions began as a medicinal remedy or flavor experiment. You steady the Jabina on a bed of hot coals, its rounded bottom nestled among glowing embers. The slender spout points toward a circle of low cups waiting patiently. Mariam returns with a ladle of cool water, which you pour over the grounds in 3 measured streams. The water hisses as it strikes the hot clay, and you see tiny bubbles rise, foreshadowing the moment when steam and flavor converge. Scholars still argue whether pouring in stages yields richer extraction or simply honors ritual pacing. No medieval barista notes survive to settle the debate. As the Jabina begins to gurgle, you lean in close, enveloped by a veil of steam that carries perfume-like notes of wood, earth, and wildflowers. One step beyond the roasting fire, this moment feels like the alchemy threshold, where raw becomes refined. Simple clay transforms beans into an almost spiritual elixir. You inhale again, and the steam tickles your nostrils like a playful reminder you're about to taste centuries of ritual. The first trickle of dark coffee emerges its flow slow and deliberate. You hold a cup beneath the spout and the liquid lands with a quiet hiss. It glistens in the cup like obsidian sunlight, and you lift it purposely, savoring the weight and the scent before taking a sip. The taste is complex, smoky depth, tempered by bright acidity, a back note of stone fruit sweetness, and a velvety mouthfeel that coats your tongue. You let the flavors linger, each nuance a tribute to the hands that tended, roasted, and ground these beans. Historians still argue whether Jabina brewed coffee influenced later Ottoman methods or remained an Ethiopian specialty long into the 19th century. A hush falls over the gathering as everyone leans forward in silent appreciation. Someone coughs softly an apology in the decorum of this circle, and you can't help but smile at the shared awkwardness of reverent caffeine consumption. The Jabina bubbles again, and you refill your cup, pouring carefully to avoid stirring up the grounds at the bottom. Modern aside, if you spilled a drop in a modern cafe, you'd be mortified, but here, a few grounds floating in your sin are a mark of authenticity, not error. You return the Jabina to its ember cradle and wipe your hands on your cloak. On a low bench, an elder recites a quiet poem. From earth's dark seed to morning's fire in clay, we trust the ancient lyre. The words flow like honey over hot stones, weaving imagery of harvest fire and communion. Quirky tidbit: some recite these verses before the first sip, believing poetry awakens the soul to deeper flavors, though nobody's tested if poetic prelude improves taste. And historians still argue whether these poems originated alongside the brew or were composed later by wandering bards. You close your eyes, letting the words and aroma swirl in your mind. It feels almost ritualistic, part brewing ceremony, part spiritual invocation. The Jabina, once static and silent, becomes a conduit between past and present, earth and spirit, being and being. You open your eyes to see your fellow drinkers nodding in unison, eyes alight with that shared caffeine glow. In this moment, you're not just sipping coffee. You're woven into a tapestry of tradition, whose threads stretch back through time. As the final drops slip into waiting cups, the Jabina sighs a soft, watery gurgle, marking the end of its performance. You cradle your cup one last time, raising it in silent salute to the vessel that made it possible. Mainstream fact: in many rural Ethiopian communities, the entire Jabina is often passed around 3 times each round, representing friendship, health, and prosperity. Historians still argue whether the 3-round custom was standardized by church scholars or emerged organically among villagers. You set your cup beside the ebbing embers and step back, your heart warmed by more than just the coffee. You've tasted history, felt its weight, inhaled its smoke, heard its poetry. And as you stand in the fading glow of coals, you sense that the Jabina, humble clay pot, though it is, carries within it the heartbeat of a culture bound by being and ritual. You step outside the hut, the sunrise now fully unfurling across the sky, and notice 2 large, flat stones resting on a woven mat just beyond the ember-stained doorway. These are your next instruments, the metate and mano, the ancient grinding stones that will transform roasted beans into the fragrant grounds that give coffee its bloom. You probably won't survive this mellow morning ritual without at least one more stretch. So roll your shoulders, wiggle your fingers, and prepare for the slow, deliberate work ahead. Historians still argue whether the metate technology came to Ethiopia via Arabian traders or evolved independently in these highlands. Mainstream fact: Traditional Ethiopian grinding stones consist of a flat-base metate and a cylindrical handheld stone mano often carved from basalt or granite to withstand heavy use. Quirky tidbit: some locals claim the rhythmic thrum of mano against metat awakens subtle aroma compounds, though nobody's conducted chemical tests, and historians still argue whether grinding chants accompanied the process or were added later for dramatic effect. You squat beside the stones, hefting the mano in both hands, and place a handful of dark, oily beans onto the metate's surface. The stone feels cool under your palms, a grounding reminder of millennia of use. You press down, gently rocking the mano back and forth. With each pass, you feel the beans give way, breaking into coarser bits, and then finer granules, the aroma intensifying with every rotation. You close your eyes to savor that scent, roasted chestnut hints of floral honey, and a warm undercurrent of smoke that whispers of the embers from which these beans emerged. As you grind, you begin to establish a rhythm left, right, forward, back, each stroke accompanied by a soft rasp. The sound is surprisingly musical, like a distant thunder rolling across the fields, and you imagine early brewers choreographing dances to match the groove. A playful thought surfaces. If I had a Spotify playlist for this, it'd be Grinding Grooves Bolorstainchant. You chuckle, then catch yourself fine grounds uneasy humor. Mariam sits nearby, carefully inspecting the texture of the grounds with the edge of her fingertip. Too coarse, she murmurs, reaching out to turn the stones a fraction faster. Not coarse enough, she adds after a moment, and you adjust once more. Scholars still argue whether coarser grounds yield brighter acidity, or whether finer ones extract more evenly, especially when brewing in a Jabina's low-temperature water. No medieval baristas left roasting journals, just oral verdicts passed from grandmother to granddaughter. Modern aside, today's electric burr grinders promise consistency at the touch of a dial, but here your hands set the pace and your muscles feel every beat of effort. You flex your forearms, feeling the slow burn of tradition. You pause to breathe, then resume, finding solace in the physicality of the task. Each handful of beans reduced to aromatic dust brings you closer to that first heady sip. As you grind, Mariam begins to hum an old melody, a lilting tune said to mimic the voice of the coffee bean itself. You ask about it, and she smiles wistfully. My grandmother taught it to me, saying it honors the bean's journey. Historians still argue whether grinding songs were meant to speed up the process, or simply to transform repetitive labor into a communal ritual. Either way, the melody weaves around you a soft soundtrack to the scent rising from the stones. After what feels like a small eternity, you lift the mano and inspect the pile of ground. They're fine but not powdery, just the right texture to steep slowly without clogging the Jabina's neck. You rub a pinch between your fingers, warm, earthy, and lightly sticky with bean oils. You bring it to your nose and inhale deeply, the aroma washing over you in waves. It's a smell that conjures memory, heart, and dawn all at once. And you realize it's the first time your full attention has hooked on a coffee scent without the brew itself. Quirky tidbit: some households set aside the first small scoop of freshly ground coffee to mix with fresh milk and feed to newborns believed to impart vitality, though nobody's documented this practice in official records, and historians still debate whether it was widespread or confined to a handful of villages. You imagine a tiny cradle with a minuscule coffee tray beside it, and laugh softly at the absurdity. You transfer the grounds into a shallow woven basket, spreading them thinly to let the air carry away excess warmth. A breeze ripples through the mat, lifting a swirl of dust that carries the coffee's perfume across the clearing. Neighbors pass by, pausing to inhale, and you see them close their eyes in silent appreciation. A communal nod to the ground's intoxicating promise. You dip 3 fingers into the pile and rub them together, then wave your hand in front of your face, savoring the scent again. Historians still argue whether sniffing the grounds was considered part of the brew's preparation or simply an accidental pleasure. Mariam invites you to taste a tiny pinch directly, no brewing required. You oblige, letting the grounds dissolve slowly on your tongue, an intense burst of roasted flavor bitterness, and that elusive floral note. It's a punch of pure coffee essence, one that would send modern espresso aficionados nodding in respect. You wipe your mouth and grin, marveling at how such humble stones and hands can unlock the bean's full sensory power. As you stand and stretch, you feel the delicate ache of muscles engaged in centuries-old practice. The sun has climbed higher, and shadows retreat from the stones. You gather the basket and grounds, preparing to return to the Jabina ceremony. The aroma lingers on your fingers, a fragrant souvenir you'll carry into the next stage. And you, artisan of aroma, are ready to witness the moment when ground meets water, a convergence of elements that will yield the original morning elixir. You step onto the woven reed mat spreading across the courtyard, its fibers still cool beneath your knees despite the sun climbing overhead. Around you, neighbors' women in brightly patterned dresses and men in simple tunics gather in loose circles, each clutching their small sign of steaming brew. You probably won't survive this social brewfest without at least one more cup. But here, coffee isn't just a drink, it's community distilled into liquid form. Historians still argue whether early Ethiopian coffee circles served primarily as news forums or evolved more as spiritual assemblies. Mainstream fact: in many Ethiopian villages, the coffee ceremony is as much about conversation as it is about caffeine. With 3 rounds of brewing Abol Tona and Baraka, each symbolizing hospitality, blessing, and prosperity. Quirky tidbit: some elders claim that if you stammer when offering your host the second cup, it means you're about to tell an embarrassing story, though nobody's eager to test that superstition. And historians still argue whether this belief began as comic relief or genuine omen. You settle cross-legged into the circle, feeling the gentle give of the mat under you, and lift your chin for a careful sip. The first round above is clear and strong. You taste the mellow warmth of stone fruit sweetness, and a whisper of smoke, savoring how it slides over your tongue. A neighbor leans in, eyebrows raised in invitation to share gossip. You lean forward too, because in this circle every bean grants a passport to tale-telling and news-sharing. A woman named Selam adjusts her scarf and begins recounting news from the next valley. A recent rainstorm washed out a bridge, forcing traders to detour through markets 2 days' march away. The group nods eyes, flicking from speaker to speaker, absorbing details. You chime in with a modern aside. Sounds like someone should borrow a GoFundMe page. Minus the internet, of course. A ripple of laughter follows, tempered by reverence for real hardship. Scholars still argue whether coffee circles replaced older oral news traditions or simply layered new rituals atop age-old storytelling. You take another sip and pass your sin to the right, offering it with both hands as custom dictates. The sin's warmth seeps into your palms, reminding you of the embers that birthed this brew. Each handoff feels like a vow of connection. Here, cups aren't merely drunk. They're exchanged and shared, a dance of generosity. Mainstream fact: the 3-serving structure. Solitary sip, communal sharing, and final blessing reflects deep-rooted Ethiopian values of fellowship and respect. Quirky tidbit: in some households, the last drop in a sin is believed to contain special good luck. Juice, drink it, and you might just find a small fortune in your path today. Though nobody's ever had gold literally fall at their feet. And historians still argue whether this tradition ever held literal weight. The second round tona arrives in a fresh jibina, thicker and richer. You notice a deeper chocolate note and a brighter acidity that tingles at the back of your throat. Selam pauses, raising her scene. To new bridges and old roads, she declares. You echo to safe travels and string beans, and the circle echoes your toast with a soft unison Exyaber Imogen thank God. You feel the communal energy ripple through your limbs as if the coffee itself is a conduit for shared blessing. Between sips, you hear a debate. Spark over a curious local practice. Whether tying a bit of grass to the jabena's handle wards off envy from neighbors, some say it works. Others call it mere superstition. Historians still argue whether such protective customs were ever widespread or simply charming local oddities. You whisper to the person next to you, "Remind me to tie a basil sprig to my espresso machine back home," earning a conspiratorial grin. As the third round, baraka drips into cups, its body is lighter and mellower the blessing cup. You close your eyes and let its gentle sweetness wash over you, the tannins muted and the floral notes pronounced like coffee watered by prayers. The circle falls silent, each person cradling their scene in a moment of quiet thanks. You inhale deeply, tiptoeing through the steam. And you almost drift, only the thought of missing tomorrow's part of the tale snaps you back. A matriarch named Abarash clears her throat and begins a soft poetic recitation, from seed to flame. From stone to stream, in humble clay our spirits gleam. The verses loop through the courtyard like a lullaby. The words wrapping around you in a shawl of cultural memory. Quirky tidbit. Some families whisper these poems only on harvest moons, believing that lunar alignment deepens the flavor, though no one's observed measurable differences, and historians still argue whether lunar lore ever truly influenced coffee quality. You notice a child at the edge of the circle, eyes wide as he watches you sip. He fidgets, then asks in a timid voice, "Why does the foreigner laugh at our stories?" You smile, remembering your own first bewildered chuckle at goat drop incense rumors. You explain gently because your stories are wonderfully vivid. My home has no tales of dancing goats, just grumpy cats refusing to move. The child's giggle rings out and the circle brightens, bonding across cultures at the swirl of a sign. As the gathering disperses, cups emptied and hearts warmed, you rise, brushing stray fibers from your clothes. The mat is carefully rolled mouths, thank the host, and you exchange farewells that feel like promises to return. Modern aside, if this were a networking event, you'd be comparing business cards and LinkedIn profiles, but here, your connection is sealed with coffee and conversation, and your network is measured in sign and smiles. You walk away from the circle, the echo of laughter and hushed prayers lingering in your ears. The courtyard falls silent, but the scent of spent grounds and numbered coals hangs like a gentle mist. You pause at the threshold, looking back at the scene of fellowship. It strikes you coffee's power isn't just in its buzz, it's in its ability to weave strangers into a circle of belonging, one delicate cup at a time. Historians still argue whether coffee ceremonies were ever formalized by rulers or always remained the province of humble villagers. But here, at least for this morning, formality feels unnecessary when warmth and story flow so freely. Ahead, a small stall of spices and sweet morsels beckons next up, cardamom, cinnamon, and perhaps an experimental blend that will tickle your palate anew. You breathe deeply, letting the residue of community and caffeine mingle in your spirit. And you weary traveler turned honored guest, carry with you the echo of shared laughter, the comfort of a shared brew, and the promise that every cup turned in friendship is a blessing in itself. The sun has climbed higher, and next to the spice stall, you find a low wooden table, strewn with tiny bowls of cardamom pods, cinnamon sticks, and occasional shards of vanilla bean. You probably won't survive this flavor experiment without bracing yourself for the unexpected, but here, spice is not just garnished, it's an invitation to reinterpret tradition one pinch at a time. Historians still argue whether early spice additions to coffee were driven by medicinal aims or simply culinary curiosity. Mainstream fact: in many parts of Ethiopia, cardamom and cinnamon are traditional coffee additions believed to aid digestion and add aromatic complexity. Quirky tidbit: some villagers insist that adding a single-star anise pod to the brewing grounds grants the drinker prophetic dreams, a claim eagerly whispered at harvest festivals, though nobody's been brave enough to test it under controlled conditions. And historians still argue whether such mystical spice lore ever held earnest sway. You pluck a few green cardamom pods and gently crush them between your fingers, releasing a heady citrusy perfume that proves visually crisp, even in the mind's eye. You toss them into a small clay bowl, then snap a cinnamon stick in half, adding it with a flourish. A merchant named Fikra approaches his eyes bright with pride. Try the cinnamon first. He says it brings out the bean's warm undernotes. You nod solemnly, as though he's sharing arcane wisdom, despite feeling like a novice alchemist. Mariam ladles fresh coffee from a simmering jabina into your sin, then uses a slender wooden skewer to fish out stray grounds. You inhale the swirling steam now infused with sweet spice, a realm away from the austere acidity of the plain brew. With the first sip, your taste buds do a little jig. The warmth of cinnamon tucks into the smoky depth, while cardamom's bright zing lingers on the tip of your tongue. It's an unexpected duet, and you can't help but let out a soft mmm, which earns you a knowing grin from Fikre. Historians still argue whether spice blends began as health remedies dispensed by herbalists or were experimental mixes invented by enterprising cooks. You reach for a shard of vanilla bean, rubbing it between your palms to coax out its sweet aroma, then drop it into the bowl of grounds, waiting to be crushed for the next round. A light breeze tugs at the edge of the stall's woven awning, carrying with it the mingled scents of bean and bark. You lean in, closing your eyes to map each layer: a smoky roast, sweet vanilla peppery cinnamon, and that herbal whisper of cardamom. It's a bouquet that feels almost floral, and you imagine sophisticated perfumers taking notes. Quirky tidbit: some elders recommend tasting the spice-infused coffee 3 times once for flavor, once for health, and once for spiritual insight. 3 sips for 3 realms, though nobody's written down the original rationale. And historians still argue whether this triadic sipping custom predated the 3 brew rounds or was tacked on later to match existing ceremonies. As you sip again, a debate sparks among onlookers about the merits of different cardamom varieties: green pods for brightness, black pods for a smoky edge. You offer your modern aside: "I'd pay extra for the smoky chocolate chili blend at a specialty cafe too." And a farmer chuckles, nodding in agreement. The group falls into a playful argument. Some prefer the spice ground finely with the beans. Others like whole pods removed before drinking. Historians still argue whether medieval roasters ever had distinct grinding protocols for spice brews, or winged it as whims dictated. You pass your sin to the right in a smooth gesture, each recipient sniffing appreciatively before sipping. The spice-infused brew seems to perk up conversation, as stories grow more animated tales of travelers who offered spiced coffee as peace offerings to rival tribes and of mountain pilgrims who carried spice studs sewn into their robe cuffs. A local elder confides that cinnamon was once more valuable than coffee itself, becoming a gift fit for royalty, though no surviving stone inscription confirms the exact rank of cinnamon in medieval markets, and historians still argue whether the spice trade eclipsed the bean trade in those early centuries. Flavor at the ready, you lean toward the spice boats again. This time, you sprinkle a tiny pinch of crushed cloves into a fresh cup, curious if their warming bite will harmonize with the existing blend. The next sip bursts with a fiery edge, the cloves' pungent heat cutting through the sweetness. You wince, laugh, then nod approvingly. Okay, that one's for true adventurers only. Laughter ripples through the group and someone counters. Try it with honey next time. You might just tame the beast. Historians still argue whether honey was ever a standard sweetener for coffee or remained a rarer luxury for special occasions. By now, the courtyard hums with spice-laced steam and lively debate. Fikre presents you with a small scroll of flavor notes, a modern twist written on parchment with ink listing spice ratios and tasting impressions. You marvel at the fusion of old and new, ages-old beans and clay pots paired with scribbled tasting charts. A playful jibe crosses your mind. Next thing, they'll have coffee sommeliers in robes grading my palate. And you imagine a medieval tasting leaderboard pinned to the village notice board. You take one last sip of the clove-enhanced brew, savoring its sharp warmth, then set your sin beside an empty spice bowl. A hush falls as the sun reaches its zenith, spotlighting the simple stall like a stage. Mariam rises and offers a blessing. May your travels be sweetened by every bean and spiced with good fortune. You echo with gratitude, feeling that the spice ceremony, though optional, has deepened your bond with the ritual. As you step away from the stall, you finger the empty bowls and imagine future travelers pausing here, guided by the scent of cardamom on the breeze. The next chapter beckons caravans bound for Mocha, where beans exchange hands and stories cross oceans. You pocket a few empty pots as keepsakes feeling the weight of their dried shells, and prepare to join the next stage of coffee's grand journey, one rich in commerce, culture, and controversy alike. You trudge along a narrow stone path that winds between a centuries-old monastery and a humble zawiya. The air is alive with the scent of incense, mingled with lingering coffee smoke. You probably won't survive this walk without wondering which sacred hall first welcomed the bean's buzz. Christian monks rising for matins or Sufi sheiks, gathering for dhikr. Historians still argue whether the first caffeine-fueled vigils were held behind stained glass windows or beneath moonlit arches. Mainstream fact records from the 16th century note that Yemeni Sufi orders officially adopted coffee to sustain their nocturnal devotions, and around the same era, Ethiopian Orthodox monks reportedly used it to stay alert during all-night prayer vigils. Quirky tidbit: some travelers claim that Christian friars in Ethiopia once painted coffee cherries in church frescoes to symbolize divine blessing, though no archaeologist has yet uncovered such a mural. And historians still argue whether any medieval chapel ever featured bean imagery, or if it's simply a traveler's tall tale. You pause at a low gate carved with crosses and crescent motifs, interwoven a local symbol of shared heritage. To your left, monks in brown habits stand at incense burners, their breaths rising in spirals of smoke. To your right, dervishes in white robes murmur in unison the tales of their prayer beads, clacking softly like grinding stones. You step up to the threshold between these worlds, feeling the weight of centuries of cross-cultural exchange pressing gently on your shoulders. A weathered monk, named Father Johannes, greets you with a nod. His eyes are kind but sharp, as if he's evaluated your hospitality credentials by the smell of coffee on your cloak. Brother, he says, do you seek the truth of coffee's arrival in holy halls? You smile and respond in kind. Truth or legend, I'll take whichever wakes me best. He chuckles, then motions you toward a tray of dark beans, resting by a simple wooden altar. Father Johannes picks up a handful of beans and rolls one between his fingertips. We call this the monk's joy, he explains. After our third procession, this brew revives our spirits for the final prayers. You ask whether the beans were grown in monastery gardens. He tilts his head. Some say blessed seeds were brought down from the highlands by traveling merchants. Others suspect a Sufi teacher slipped us a bag one night. Historians still argue whether coffee was a heavenly gift or a heavenly bribe. You lean in, inhaling the fragrance, earthy depth, a faint whisper of smoke, and a gentle sweetness that seems almost otherworldly. Modern aside, if this were a cafe chain, they'd label it Monk's Meditative Blend and charge triple the price for the monastic provenance tag. You stifle a grin, imagining a Starbucks priest giving a sermon on single-origin beans. Father Johannes ladles hot water over the grounds in a small brass pot, stirring clockwise 3 times. The liquid swirls darkly before he pours it into plain earthenware cups. You raise yours to your lips and sip deliberately. The taste is smooth yet solemn. Wood smoke, folded under honeyed notes, a pleasing bitterness that holds your attention like a well-timed refrain in Gregorian chant. And you remember the Jabina's first pour, but here the metal pot lends a slightly sharper edge. Historians still argue whether Ottoman metal urns influenced monastic brewing or if local clay vessels persisted in secret sanctuaries long after. You hand the cup back to Father Johannes, who wipes its rim with a clean cloth. When our order faced droughts and famine, we prayed for rain and harvested enough cherries to brew hope itself, he says softly. You nod appreciatively, picturing thirsty monks cheering as steaming cups arrive like miracles. Quirky tidbit legend holds that a monk once blessed an entire harvest field by sprinkling leftover grounds like holy water, though church records remain silent on whether that actually summoned rain or just amused the novices. Turning toward the Zawiya, you find Sufi sheikhs seated around a low stone fountain water, dripping in a steady cadence like a celestial metronome. Their jibinas rest on flat stones beside them, smoke spiraling into the open air. You settle among them, feeling the cool spray from the fountain mingle with the warmth of freshly brewed coffee. One sheikh, his eyes closed, murmurs, "O bean, grant us clarity in darkness," then sips slowly. You recall that buzzing goat dance from Chaldees legend and wonder if the goats would approve of this aquatic accompaniment. A young dervish named Hassan explains their method. We grind the beans coarse, then pour water heated to just below boiling, letting it steep until we hear the telltale gurgle. You listen for the sound, soft, like a distant bell tolling for morning prayers. Modern aside today, baristas call this full immersion brew, charging extra for that depth. Though here, no coin changes hands, only devotion. Hassan pours you a cup and smiles. Taste the earth, my friend. You bring it to your lips and find a sharper bite than the monastic brew, with brighter acidity and a whisper of wildflowers. The contrast is subtle but distinct: clay vessel versus brass, coarse, grind versus fine. You take a second sip, noting the interplay of flavors as though comparing sonnets and odes. Historians still argue whether these regional variations signify theological differences or simply preferences born from available tools. As you sip a debate, sparks between Father Johannes and Hassan carried over on the morning breeze. The monk insists that their metal pots yield a more divine clarity of flavor. The sheikh counters that clay's porous nature deepens the brew's soul. You can't help but interject your modern aside. I think they'd both be impressed by French presses, which earns you amused glances and a ripple of laughter from both sides. Historians still argue whether European brewing innovations owed anything to these ancient traditions or emerged entirely apart. A third voice joins in Brother Theodros, a Baroque-bearded abbot who wandered here after hearing rumors of coffee miracles. He holds up a small scroll. "I found this in an old library," he says, unrolling it. It describes monks and mystics sharing beans under the same moon. You lean in curious if it's a genuine relic or a pious forgery. Historians still argue whether this scroll is authentic or a later pastiche. He admits, folding it gently. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe the scroll was penned by a Turkish diplomat eager to curry favor with both orders, though no one can explain why a diplomat would write coffee theology instead of state reports. You rise and turn, slowly letting the circle's energy encompass you. Each sip you've taken feels layered, not just with flavor but with centuries of devotion, debate, and cross-pollination. You recall the goats dancing the grinding stones, humming the Jabina's alchemy, and now this moment of shared reverence between crosses and crescents. It strikes you that coffee's true miracle wasn't the buzz, but its ability to spark dialogue across divides. You lift your cup once more, uniting the two traditions in a silent toast. To beans that nourish body and spirit, to debates that enrich understanding, and to shared circles that transcend boundaries. And as you sip, you feel the warmth settle in your chest, a reminder that whether clay or brass goat legend or monastic lore, the heart of the ceremony lies in gathering together cup by cup, question by question. You step onto the sandy expanse of a coastal caravan outpost, where the salty breeze from the Red Sea mingles with the rich perfume of coffee beans, piled high in woven sacks. You probably won't survive this bustling scene without letting the tide of commerce wash over you, but here you stand at the crossroads where highland harvests meet ocean voyages, and where the legend of Mocha was born. Historians still argue whether the port's name lent its flavor to the world, or whether traders simply branded every rich bean mocha for marketing flair. Mainstream fact: by the late 15th century, Yemeni merchants began exporting coffee through the port city of Al-Muka Mocha, establishing one of the earliest global coffee trade networks. Quirky tidbit: some caravan leaders are said to have lashed goats to the holds of merchant ships and homage, to call this legend believing the animals ensured safe passage. Those stowaway goat reports are probably more myth than maritime record, and historians still argue whether any real goats ever clung below decks or if the story sailed on rumor alone. As you tread between camel caravans, you glimpse sacks stamped with crimson seals, each mark signifying a different highland farmer's family name. The camels laden with burlap shuffle in rhythm their padded feet, whispering secrets to the dunes. You probably won't survive the climb atop a camel with your dignity intact, but for authenticity's sake, you mount one, gripping its rough saddle as it lurches upward. The spice you tasted earlier swirls in your mind. Imagine a cinnamon-scented sea breeze. Modern aside, today's shipping containers have climate control. Back then, traders relied on shade cloths and sea mists to prevent beans from overheating or fermenting prematurely. Your caravan crosses a rocky promontory and dips into a hidden bay where wooden dhows lie anchored, their triangular sails furled against the sky. Merchants shout greetings in Amharic, Arabic, and Swahili, a testament to coffee's transcontinental journey. You step onto a plank leading to a bustling quay, where dock workers unload sacks onto wooden carts. A merchant named Rashid grins at you, dusting his hands on his robe. "Welcome to Mocha," he says, "where the world tastes Ethiopia." You lean in to inspect a sack. The beans inside are smaller and rounder than those you've seen at dawn, a signature trait of the Mocha varietal, prized for its intense wine-like acidity. You pop one into your mouth, crunching thoughtfully on the roasted husk. Its flavor is bright and almost berry-like, with a whisper of sea salt from the ocean air. Quirky tidbit: some sailors swear that dipping mocha beans in seawater before drying creates a unique maritime roast, though nobody's documented consistent results, and historians still argue whether salted beans were ever more than a one-off experiment by adventurous traders. Nearby, the air hangs heavy with bartering chants, as buyers from as far as India and Persia haggle over prices. You wander through the crowds, absorbing the multilingual cacophony. A Persian merchant offers to trade silks for a sack of beans. An Indian trader counters with peppercorns and textiles. The lack of gold in the transaction surprises you. Coffee itself is the currency, not an adjunct. Historians still argue whether early coffee valuations were based on weight quality or the buyer's reputation. You pause at a makeshift cafe tent, its wooden frame draped with colorful cloths. Inside, a few rough-hewn stools surround a low table, where local brewers peddle fresh cups to weary dockhands. You slide onto a stool and lift a small brass cup. The taste is bold, more intense and acidic than the brew you had inland yet, with a crisp clarity that belies its humble presentation. You savor the sharp cherry notes that gave mocha beans their renown. Mainstream fact: mocha coffee became synonymous in Europe, with beans exhibiting chocolate-like undertones, though the flavor profile leans more toward fruity acidity. A merchant's aide approaches, offering a fragrant biscotti of toasted barley as a pairing. You nibble it thoughtfully, grateful for the mild sweetness after the coffee's tartness. Modern aside, pairing coffee with baked goods is nothing new. Ancient sailors knew to bring crackers to balance flavors, though their recipe was likely less sweet and more utilitarian. You stand and wander the quay edge, watching dhows unfurl their sails. Soon, these prized sacks of beans will voyage across the Indian Ocean to ports in Gujarat, Malabar, and beyond, eventually reaching Venetian merchants eager to sample the exotic elixir. You can almost hear the ripple of future debates. Was mocha the first single-origin coffee? Historians still argue whether regional labels emerged organically or as a marketing invention by eager European traders. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the blood-orange sand, you board a small boat laden with coffee sacks. The gentle rocking reminds you of the undulating terraces where these beans first grew. You inhale the mingled scent of salt smoke and roasted coffee, a sensory tapestry woven from hill and harbor. A faint echo of goat bells seems to drift across the water, as though Caldi's herd has joined this maritime migration. You disembark at day's end, back on solid land footsteps echoing on the dock planks. The quay is still alive with trade and story, each sack a chapter in coffee's expanding saga. You pocket a single mocha bean as a keepsake, its glossy surface reflecting the fiery sunset. And you weary traveler of land and sea have tasted coffee's first big adventure, where beans slipped from Ethiopian hands into a global swirl, setting the stage for centuries of awakened mornings. You arrive at a sun-dappled pavilion, draped in saffron and burgundy silks, the air fragrant with incense and fresh jasmine garlands. Courtiers in jeweled turbans and embroidered caftans recline on low divans, fanning themselves with peacock feather fans, as servants glide by with gilded trays of steam-kissed scene. You probably won't survive this decadent scene without a hint of envy or at least a bit of velvet on your robes. But here, coffee has been elevated from humble hearth to royal indulgence. Historians still argue whether these courtly ceremonies originated in Ethiopian highlands or were innovations of Yemeni sultans seeking status symbols. Mainstream fact: by the 17th century, Ottoman and Yemeni courts hosted elaborate coffee rituals, complete with specialized attendants and ornate coffee paraphernalia, solidifying coffee's status as a symbol of wealth and sophistication. Quirky tidbit: some sultans reportedly insisted that each cup of coffee be stirred exactly 17 times, believing the prime number ensured perfect balance. Though nobody's preserved a royal stirring log, and historians still argue whether mathematical mysticism ever guided court etiquette or if it simply amused palace scholars. You step onto a mosaic tile floor and are greeted by a eunuch bearing a silver tesbeh in a velvet-lined basket. The pot glints in the morning light, its long handle encrusted with tiny gems. A young attendant swiftly pours the dark brew into a slender-necked cup, the liquid rippling like ink on silk. You cradle the cup between your palms, though the metal is cool. The promise of warmth seeps through and lifts it to your lips. The flavor is lavish rich chocolate undertones, a whisper of rosewater, and a lingering orange blossom note that feels almost perfumed. You let out a soft sigh, imagining modern baristas drooling over this complexity. A courtier gestures for you to join a circle of cushioned ottomans beneath a gilded canopy. You settle in, adjusting an imaginary sash as a musician strokes a sitar-like rebab in the corner. The melody weaves through the air like steam, setting a refined backdrop for a whispered conversation. You lean toward your neighbor, lowering your voice. Remind me to ask if they have any of those cinnamon-spiced lattes back home. You quip, earning a suppressed giggle and a polite eyebrow raise. One noblewoman with coal-lined eyes raises her scene. For sovereignty and insight she toasts. May our realms flourish. You echo, may our beans stay fresh, and the group offers a soft Khair Mubarak, good blessing in unison. Scholars still argue whether such toasts followed religious formats or mirrored pre-Islamic libation customs. There's no surviving royal etiquette manual to confirm either. A slender tray of sugared almonds and rosewater candies appears, and you sample one delicate petal-shaped sweet. Its floral sweetness plays off the coffee's nuanced bitterness in perfect harmony, a confection crafted for monarchs. Modern aside, if this were a five-star hotel, they'd call it a signature palate cleanse, charging a premium for that tiny almond draped in gold leaf. Here, it's simply expected. A court official named Sharif leans in and whispers of the Sultan's rumored experiment infusing coffee with saffron threads hand-harvested at dawn. They say he murmurs that saffron coffee grants prophetic visions. You raise an eyebrow. Prophetic coffee. You almost expect the next bean to spill its secrets. Historians still argue whether saffron was ever routinely blended into court brews or if the tale emerged from wandering poets craving romantic flair. As you sip your second cup, a chamberlain announces the start of a debate whether coffee should replace wine at official banquets. The Sultan himself, it is said, once presided over such a council, draping a velvet cloak over his shoulders and sipping from an ivory-handled cup. Coffee's clarity uplifts the mind, one advisor argued. But wine stirs the heart, countered another. Historians still argue whether that fateful debate ended in a ban on alcohol or simply birthed early temperance laws. No decree has ever been found that definitively tips the scales. You stifle a laugh at the notion of medieval lobbyists arguing over coffee pH levels. Modern aside, can you imagine the hashtag #BeanLobby trending on parchment scrolls? The thought of scribes furiously inscribing caffeine metrics makes you grin behind your scene. A perfume breeze drifts through the pavilion as Sharif offers another cup, this one steeped longer, yielding a darker, almost syrupy body. You savor its depth, molasses notes balanced by bright lemony acidity, the edges softened by rosewater's gentle sweetness. It feels less like coffee and more like a delicate tonic for the soul. You remember the brisk brew of the caravan and the austere monastery cup, each had its place, but this is pure opulence in a vessel. The musicians shift to a lilting tune, and dancers in flowing robes emerge, their anklets tinkling like distant bells. They weave through the courtiers, their movements are as precise as the coffee ceremony itself, a choreography of power and grace. You watch scene in hand, entranced by the seamless blend of art ritual and bean-driven ritual. Quirky tidbit: occasionally a dancer accidentally kicks over a tray of cups. An unfortunate mishap that historically earned you a swift rebuke, or the Sultan's amused tolerance, depending on one's standing at court. Though historians still argue whether any prince ever brewed retribution tea for such faux pas. As the ceremony reaches its zenith, servants glide by, offering fresh cups in ornate filigree holders, and the crowd hums with polite enthusiasm. You lift your final cup, feeling the weight of centuries of courtly refinement infuse each drop. The brew's complexity reminds you that coffee is more than a drink. It's a mirror reflecting culture's finest threads, from sultanic intrigue to poet's flourish. You set your cup on a mother-of-pearl inlaid table and stand bowing deeply to the assembled nobles. As you step away, the pavilion's canopy flutters in the breeze, and you catch a final waft of jasmine rose and roasting beans. You leave knowing that in this gilded dawn, coffee has been celebrated not only as a stimulant, but as an art form, a diplomatic tool, and a symbol of grandeur. And you, honored guest of court, carry with you the memory of velvet-smooth sips beneath silk canopies, a vivid chapter in the world's ever-unfolding coffee saga. You slip away from the courtly splendor, leaving behind silk canopies and tinkling anklets, and find yourself drawn to a small alcove, where a group of poets and storytellers has gathered around a low brazier. The embers glow softly, and fragrant smoke spirals upward, weaving through the flickering torchlight like damp silk. You probably won't survive this artistic enclave without getting lost in verse. But here, coffee is the muse that transforms mere words into vivid tapestries of sound and image. Historians still argue whether these poetic circles emerged alongside the beverage's rise, or adopted the bean as a convenient excuse for late-night revelry. Mainstream fact: by the 17th century, coffeehouses across the Ottoman Empire and into Europe became hubs for literary salons, where poets and philosophers debated ideas over cups of dark brew. Quirky tidbit: some wandering bards kept hidden vials of concentrated coffee extract in their satchels, slipping a drop into their mouths to spark inspiration before performances, though nobody's cataloged the original recipes. And historians still argue whether these liquid muses were common or just the stuff of bardic legend. You settle on a carved wooden bench, the wood smooth from generations of use, and lift your scene, filled with strong, unspiced coffee. The liquid glints in the brazier's glow, reflecting the dance of shadows on the walls. A poet named Kebede unfurls a scroll and begins reciting in a soft, rhythmic cadence. From ember's kiss to cup's caress, the bean awakened, dreams suppressed. Through swirling steam, our thoughts coalesce, and muse-stirred hearts find needed rest. His words tumble over your senses like warm waves, each line steeped in rich metaphor. You close your eyes, letting the imagery, embers, dreams, steam meld with the coffee's aroma, creating a sensory tapestry that feels almost sacred. Yet scholars still argue whether such verses were composed specifically for coffee ceremonies or repurposed existing hymns to exalt the drink. The next poet, Amina, takes up the challenge, her voice lilting like the bird calls you heard at dawn. Pour forth the liquid velvet hue. In every cup a story new. The assembly murmurs approval, nodding at the clever metaphors of velvet and stories, coffee as both fabric and narrative. You sip again the brew's vitality, charging your mind and jot a mental note. Modern latte art makers could take lessons here. A lively debate sparks among the patrons whether coffee should be celebrated as a divine gift or a human-engineered delight. One scholar argues that the bean's discovery was an act of providence meant to guide humanity toward enlightenment. Another insists that farmers' ingenuity in cultivation and roasting deserves the true credit. Historians still argue whether the bean's role in cultural transformation is best attributed to chance discovery or calculated innovation. Between verses, a storyteller named Halima leans forward, her eyes gleaming. She recounts a fringe tale of a hidden valley in the highlands, where beans grew so large that locals thought them to be petrified bird eggs. According to her, villagers cracked them open with hammers only to discover the familiar red flesh within, leading to wild celebrations and perhaps the first fermenting experiments. You raise an eyebrow, such a tale strains credibility, but you relish the imagery. Quirky tidbit, some say these egg beans can still be found by the keen-eyed forager in remote highland groves, though nobody's authenticated a single specimen. And historians still argue whether it's a myth born of wishful thinking or misidentified fruit. A musician plucks a kora in the corner, adding a gentle harp-like accompaniment to the poetry. The combination of burst music and coffee creates an almost trance-like atmosphere, and you feel yourself drifting between wakefulness and reverie. You take another sip, grounding yourself in the brew's smoky depth, and marvel at how coffee can bridge the gap between earth and imagination. As the moon, still lingering pale in the morning sky, fades, the circle prepares to adjourn. Kebede stands raising his sign. To beans that bind our hearts and minds he toasts, and the group responds with a resounding Amen and Egziaber Imagen. You echo, feeling the communal energy surge through your veins. You step back to brazier's heat, warming your cheeks, and glance at the scrolls, scattered around quill-written poems, fragments of ancient odes, and even a sketch of Chaldee's dancing goats. It strikes you that coffee's true poetry lies not just in words, but in the shared experience it ignites. Historians still argue whether these literary gatherings predate European salons, or were inspired by Venetian merchants returning with caffeinated tales. You leave the alcove, the echo of verses mingling with the scent of soot and brew, and find yourself on a terrace overlooking the city's tiled roofs. The morning has ripened into a golden haze, and coffeehouses below hum with new arrivals seeking their first cup. You hold your scene aloft, lifting it in silent salute to the countless voices coffee has united. And as you gaze over the horizon, you realize that in each whispered poem and spirited debate, coffee has woven its epic a story of human curiosity, creativity, and communal connection, one fragrant cup at a time. You descend worn stone steps carved into the hillside, arriving at a windswept clearing where the remains of ancient wild coffee shrubs cling to rocky soil. The sun's rays filter through thorny branches, illuminating clusters of berries still mottled with natural white bloom. You probably won't survive this academic scavenger hunt without tripping over a root or two. But here you stand at the heart of the debate. Did coffee's journey begin in the wild or under the careful hand of early cultivators? Historians still argue whether the first beans were plucked straight from untamed groves or bred in primitive gardens. Mainstream fact genetic studies have identified thousands of Coffea arabica varieties in Ethiopia's Kaffa region, many showing genetic markers of both wild and domesticated strains, suggesting a complex interplay of natural and human selection over centuries. Quirky tidbit: some local foragers believe that spotting a berry with 5 seeds instead of the usual 2 is a sign of supernatural favor, though nobody's conducted a peer-reviewed study on pentaseed berries, and historians still argue whether such odd fruits ever had a role beyond dinner table lore. You crouch beside a gnarled shrub, brushing your fingertips over velvety leaves. A single berry falls into your palm, its red skin still soft with morning dew. You pop it in your mouth and taste that familiar blend of sweetness and tart brightness. Imagine that berry centuries ago, slipping from a branch into a passing baboon's paw. Could that wild creature have been coffee's inadvertent first planter? Modern aside, if baboons had Instagram, we'd be following primate pour-over by now. A researcher named Dr. Alemayahu steps into the clearing, his notebook bristling with specimen sketches. Here, he says, "Pointing is one of the few remaining wild populations unaffected by cultivation." You peer through binoculars and spot slender shoots weaving across the rocks. But he continues, "We also see early terracing and stone walls, nearby evidence of proto-farming dating back to the 10th century. You furrow your brow, wild or gardened. Historians still argue whether such terraces served as defensive earthworks repurposed for coffee or were built specifically to nurture plantings. You rise and stroll toward a weathered stone wall, tracing the mortar with your fingertips. Moss clings to the cracks, and small blooms push through the crevices. It feels like time's fingerprint marking human hands at work. Quirky tidbit: village elders whisper that a secret priesthood once guarded these gardens, chanting prayers to the coffee trees at moonrise. Though no archaeological dig has confirmed ritual altars, and historians still argue whether coffee cults ever had formal priestly orders. You look out over a broader panorama beyond this rocky enclave. Lush forests stretch toward misty peaks. Somewhere in that green expanse, wild coffee still thrives in pockets untouched by a plow or pruning hook. Some botanists believe that preserving those stands is vital to coffee's future, offering genetic resilience against disease and climate stress. Mainstream fact: modern breeding programs often source resistance traits from wild Coffea arabica relatives to combat pests, like coffee leaf rust and the coffee berry borer. Historians still argue whether early farmers recognized and propagated disease-resistant plants, or simply stumbled upon hard mutations by chance. A local guide named T-Guest leads you deeper, sketching lines around clusters of plants that differ slightly in leaf shape and berry hue. These are heirloom varietals, she explains, carried in small garden plots and guarded like family treasures. You crouch to examine one particularly bushy specimen, its berries smaller but intensely aromatic. You savor a bite, noting floral notes you've never encountered before. It's like discovering a secret chapter in coffee's flavor lexicon. Historians still argue whether early gardeners prized flavor distinctions or focused solely on yield. You stand and stretch, brushing dust from your trousers. and reflect on how coffee's origin story wove together wild discovery and human ingenuity. One theory posits that wandering herders stumbled upon energizing berries in the forest and began cultivating them near water sources. Another suggests that monastic communities sowed seeds purposefully to ensure reliable supplies for incense-like devotional brews. Historians still argue whether the first cultivator was a goat herder, a devout monk, or a curious village elder. Modern aside, today's specialty coffee explorers trek remote mountains in search of lost varietals and plot twist heirlooms. Imagine tagging each fine bean bounty and posting coordinates on a hipster map. You chuckle picturing baristas wearing trekking boots and hip waders to gather cherries. But here, you witness the real thing, nature and nurture, entwined in a delicate dance. At the clearing's edge, you find a small enclosure where researchers have begun experimental plantings, crossbreeding wild and cultivated types to track trait inheritance. Tiny labels mark rows W plus G1 GXW2 heirloom hybrid. You crouch to read one, then look out across the wild grove beyond. The experiment, you realize, mirrors coffee's entire saga, humans harnessing wild bounty, then sending it outward to energize the cultures worldwide. You stand in that panorama, wild forests behind you, marked plots at your feet, ancient terraces to one side, and distant peaks, glowing gold in the lingering dawn. It's a crossroads of histories and possibilities. You inhale the mist-laden air, tasting that primal forest note, blended with cultivated depth. In that single breath you sense coffee's journey from chanceberry to global brew. A final debate crackles in your mind: was coffee the gift of wild nature or the triumph of human cultivation? Historians still argue whether to credit spontaneous discovery or deliberate selection. Yet, perhaps the truth, like the best cups of coffee, lies in the balance between the two: wild and tended mystery, and mastery, earth and earthenware. You pick up your last wild berry, roll it between your fingers, and let it fall gently onto the stone wall. As it rests among moss and lichen, you feel connected to both past and future, a lineage of wild berries and human hands that shaped coffee into the ritual you know today. You return to the village as dusk's lavender shadows lengthen across the courtyard, where a final circle is forming around smoldering coals and the familiar silhouette of the jebina. You probably won't survive this last ceremony without succumbing to complete serenity, but here, twilight's gentle rituals mirror those of dawn, closing the circle of coffee's day at the edge of dream and wakefulness. Historians still argue whether evening coffee was originally brewed for practical alertness, through nocturnal chores, or simply as a social pause to savor the day's memories. Mainstream fact: Ethiopian coffee ceremonies traditionally include an evening round known as the dessert, or third round served after the main three brews, symbolizing rest and reflection. Quirky tidbit: some families scatter a pinch of local chopped herbs like basil or rue into the final brew to ward off nightmares, though nobody's linked this practice to measurable dream quality. And historians still argue whether such insomnia-curing customs originated in antiquity or are more recent innovations. You settle on a soft cushion by the fire's glow, the coals whispering embers as they cool. The jabena's familiar curve rests on them, and you feel the ritual symmetry. Morning's first heat returns at twilight's end. Mariam kneels to adjust the coals before the pot, her silhouette outlined by a flickering firelight. This cup, she says softly, is for remembering today's journey and blessing tomorrow's path. You nod heartful, anticipating the comforting warmth. As the jabina warms, you watch the smoke swirl against the darkening sky. each wisp an echo of dawn's steam. A hush settles. Neighbors gather close, their faces gentle in the lamplight. You inhale the scent earth ember and a lingering hint of cardamom from earlier experiments, and feel the day's pulse slow in your veins. Modern aside, if this were a meditation app, they'd call it Evening Brew Mindfulness, guiding you through breaths synced to your sips. Miriam pours the dark liquid into sun. With practiced grace, the first pour clear and poignant. You lift yours and sip, letting the mild bitterness and soft floral notes wash over you. It's less sharp than morning's brew, smoother than midday's spice cup, like the last golden ray of sunlight melting into dusk. Historians still argue whether Twilight Brew's gentler profile was intentional or simply a side effect of cooler water and reduced ground quantity. The second pour feels thicker, richer, its body full of days' memories. A tapestry of goat-led treks, monastic debates, caravan crossings, and courtly opulence. You swirl the cup, watching the liquid catch firelight glints. A neighbor whispers a quiet blessing. Baraka li Laila, blessing to the night. You respond with a nod, feeling the shared sentiment coil in your chest. As you sip the final barley-hued round the baraka, the essence is almost syrupy, soft on the tongue, like a lullaby in liquid form. This is the cup of closure, a seal on the day's narrative. You close your eyes, letting your thoughts drift through each section you've lived. Dawn's mist, dancing goats, Sufi chants, coffee terraces, roasts and grinds, social circles, spice stalls, monasteries, ports of Mocha royal court, poetic alcoves, wild forays, and now this gentle nightcap. A matriarch named Abarash rises and recites a final poem in a voice like warm velvet. In quiet hush, the coals grow low, yet embers glow in memory flows. We part with the cup, but the spirit stays to greet the dawn in future days. Her words wrap around the gathering like a shawl, soft and reassuring. You sip once more, feeling the heat ripple through your chest, carrying both the day's vigor and the night's calm. Quirky tidbit: some say that if you leave 2 drops of this last brew on the heart, you'll dream of distant homelands, though no one's mapped those dreams, and historians still argue whether hearthside offerings to dreams date back to pre-Christian rites or are simply poetic flourishes. The coals burned low. The jabina emptied stands cool. You rise, brushing ash from your cloak, and feel the gentle pull of sleep in your limbs. Fellow travelers hug and bid soft farewells, their voices hushed so as not to shatter the night's spell. You step back, letting the circle's warmth recede into the evening air. Your head feels light thoughts drifting on the aroma still clinging to your fingertips. Each bead of steam you've inhaled, each ember's glow you've watched has woven itself into your memory. You've tasted centuries in a single day, walked through legend and history, one cup at a time, and now, Twilight's gentle ritual is your lullaby. The colors around you deepen into purples and blues, like ink spilling across the parchment. Your breath slows each inhale, a soft echo of coffee's lingering fragrance. Each exhale a gentle release of the day's tensions. The coal's warmth has faded, leaving behind only a comforting residual heat that mirrors your tranquil pulse. Imagine now that you're nestled in a quiet corner of this courtyard. Distant sounds muted the sky, a velvet canvas dotted with emerging stars. The scent of roasted beans drifts, faintly weaving with the night air like a whispered secret. There is no rush here, no need to hurry toward tomorrow. Instead, your mind drifts over the morning's adventures, savoring each detail. The goats dance, the Sufi chant the terraced fields, and the journey to Mocha's shores. Each memory is a gentle wave in the sea of consciousness, ebbing softly toward a dream. Let your eyelids grow heavy, each blink slower than the last as you sink into the promise of rest. Feel the soft cushion beneath you, the cool night air on your skin, and the comforting thought that coffee's story continues in countless hearts and hearts long after you close your eyes. As thoughts of ritual and roast of trade routes and royal courts of poetry and wild groves swirl in your mind like the last spirals of smoke, allow yourself to drift. Sleep approaches like a gentle tide, carrying you toward dreams steeped in history's rich aroma. Rest now, knowing that at dawn, coffee's tale will beckon anew. Another chapter, another cup, another sunrise.